The underground fighting arena operated in the darkest corner of San Francisco's warehouse district, a place where the law's reach ended and cruelty began. Marcus Kane stood in the shadows outside. His jaw clenched as he listened to the sounds emerging from within, shouts, jeers. The unmistakable noise of human suffering turned into entertainment. Marcus was a former marshal, 35 years old, with dark hair pulled back and a muscular build that came from years of hard work and harder fights. He'd resigned his position 6 months ago after discovering that some of the city's most powerful men were involved in illegal operations the law seemed unwilling to touch. Since then, he'd been working alone, gathering evidence, building cases, and when necessary, taking more direct action. Tonight was one of those direct action nights. His informant, a former worker at the arena who'd grown a conscience, had told him about the latest horror, women being held prisoner, forced to fight or serve as entertainment, their identities stripped away and replaced with numbers. The informant had specifically mentioned one woman, number 7, who was heavily pregnant and being held in conditions that were killing her slowly. "They're taking bets on whether she'll survive childbirth," the informant had said, his voice shaking with disgust. "They've got her in a cage in the back and they bring people through to look at her like she's an animal at a zoo. It's the most inhuman thing I've ever seen, and I can't be part of it anymore." That had been all Marcus needed to hear. Now, as midnight approached, Marcus moved from the shadows toward the warehouse's side entrance. He had a plan, had mapped out the building's layout, knew where the women were likely being held. But plans only worked until the first punch was thrown, and Marcus was prepared for things to get violent. The side door was locked, but Marcus made quick work of it with tools he'd acquired during his martial days. He slipped inside, immediately hit by the smell of sweat, smoke, and desperation. The main arena was to his left, where he could hear a fight in progress and the crowd's bloodthirsty reactions. But Marcus turned right, toward the back rooms where the informant said the women were kept. He moved silently through dimly lit corridors until he heard voices ahead. 2 guards stood outside a reinforced door, laughing about something Marcus didn't want to imagine. "Excuse me, gentlemen," Marcus said, stepping into the light. The guards turned, reaching for weapons, but Marcus was faster. Years of training and a righteousness-fueled anger made him efficient. Within seconds, both guards were unconscious on the floor, and Marcus had their keys. He unlocked the door and stepped into a nightmare. The room was large and divided into sections by bars and cages. In several of them, women huddled. Some bruised from fights they'd been forced into, others clearly there for different forms of exploitation. They all looked at Marcus with identical expressions, hope warring with fear that this was just another form of torment. "I'm here to get you out," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying authority and sincerity. "All of you. But I need you to stay quiet for just a few more minutes while I make sure the way is clear." Then he saw her. In the back corner, in a cage barely large enough to lie down in, was a young woman with long blonde hair matted with sweat and dirt. She wore a thin, stained dress and was heavily pregnant, her arms wrapped protectively around her swollen belly. Her face was pale with pain and exhaustion, and Marcus could see she was in active labor, trying desperately to stay quiet and control her breathing. Above her cage, someone had scrawled number 7 in crude paint. Marcus felt rage unlike anything he'd experienced in his life. He crossed to her cage in 3 strides and knelt down. "I'm Marcus," he said gently. "I'm getting you out of here." The woman looked at him with eyes that had seen too much suffering, that barely dared to hope. "They'll kill you," she whispered. "Too many of them. Let me worry about that," Marcus said, already working on the cage lock. "What's your name?" "They call me number 7. "That's not what I asked," Marcus said firmly but kindly. "What's your name?" "Your real name." The woman's eyes filled with tears. I haven't heard anyone ask that in so long." "Sarah. My name is Sarah." "Hello, Sarah," Marcus said, finally getting the cage open. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He helped her out carefully, noting how she winced with contractions. She wouldn't make it far in this condition, which meant his plan needed to change from a quiet extraction to something more direct. "Listen," Marcus said to all the women. "There are about 30 men in the main arena. I can't fight them all, especially not while protecting you. So here's what's going to happen. I'm going to create a distraction. When you hear chaos start, you run. The exit is down this corridor, turn left, through the side door. There are 2 marshals waiting in an alley 3 blocks west. I signaled them before I came in. Run to them. They'll protect you. What about you?" one of the other women asked. "I'll be right behind you," Marcus said. "But first I need to make sure no one follows." He turned to Sarah, who was leaning against the wall, breathing through another contraction. "Can you walk?" "I can try," she said. "That's all I ask." Marcus looked at the other women. "Help her. Support her. Get her to safety first." Then Marcus did something that shocked them all. He pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil and quickly wrote something. He handed it to Sarah. "That's your name," he said. "Sarah, not a number, a name. You're a person, not property. Don't ever let anyone take that from you again." Sarah clutched the paper like it was the most precious thing in the world, tears streaming down her face. Marcus went back to the unconscious guards and took their weapons, not guns, but clubs and knives. Then he walked toward the main arena, his mind calm despite what he was about to do. The arena was in full swing. A brutal fight taking place in the center while men in expensive suits placed bets and shouted encouragement for more violence. Marcus recognized several faces, businessmen, a city councilman, even a judge he'd once respected. That respect died as he watched them laugh while 2 desperate people fought for their survival. Marcus stepped into the light of the arena and gradually people noticed him. The fighting stopped. The shouting died down. And the man who ran this place, a criminal named Victor Strand who'd evaded prosecution for years, stood up from his seat with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We have an uninvited guest," Strand announced. "Former Marshal Kane. I'd heard you'd gone rogue, but I didn't expect you to be stupid enough to walk into my establishment." "I'm here for the women you're holding prisoner," Marcus said clearly, his voice carrying through the sudden silence. "All of them. And I'm here to make sure you never do this again." Strand laughed. "You and what army, Kane? There's 1 of you and 30 of us. I don't need an army to deal with cowards who cage pregnant women and bet on their suffering," Marcus replied. "I just need a willingness to do what's right, regardless of the odds." He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Every person here is complicit in human trafficking, unlawful imprisonment, and exploitation. I've documented everything. Names, faces, transactions. The evidence is with journalists and federal marshals. Even if you silence me tonight, the truth is already out there." He could see the uncertainty spreading through the crowd. These were men accustomed to operating in shadows, where their crimes went unnoticed or unpunished. The light of exposure terrified them. "But I'll give you 1 chance," Marcus continued. "Leave now, walk away. Let the women go free. And maybe, just maybe, you'll face charges for what you've done instead of something worse." "And if we don't?" Strand asked, his smile gone now. "Then I start breaking things," Marcus said simply. "Starting with you." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Strand nodded to his men, and they came at Marcus from all sides. What followed was brutal and efficient. Marcus had trained for years in hand-to-hand combat, but more than that, he was fighting for something that mattered. Every punch he threw was for Sarah, for the other women trapped in cages, for every person these men had dehumanized and destroyed. He fought with a ferocity that shocked even himself, taking down 3 men, then 5, then 8. The arena descended into chaos, as some men tried to flee and others tried to overwhelm Marcus through sheer numbers. But Marcus had planned for this. The smoke he'd released near the entrance was already working, making it hard to see and breathe. The fire alarm he'd triggered brought sirens in the distance. And the federal marshals he'd contacted, former colleagues who still believed in justice, were already surrounding the building. In the confusion, Marcus made it back to the corridor where he'd left the women. They were gone, hopefully escaped and on their way to safety. He'd bought them time, and that was all that mattered. Marcus was about to follow when Strand appeared, blocking his path with several armed men. "You've destroyed my business," Strand snarled. "Cost me millions. Exposed my associates. You think you can just walk away from that?" "I think I can sleep at night, which is more than you'll ever do again," Marcus replied. The standoff ended when the federal marshals burst in, guns drawn and badges displayed. Strand and his associates were arrested, and Marcus was pulled aside by his former partner, a marshal named Jack Roberts. "You're insane, Kane," Jack said, though there was admiration in his voice. "Taking on 30 men alone. But you did it. The women are safe. We've got enough evidence from this raid to put these bastards away for life." "What about Sarah?" Marcus asked immediately. "The pregnant woman, is she all right?" "She's at the hospital," Jack said. "In labor, but the doctors say she and the baby will be fine. She kept asking about you, about the man who gave her back her name." Marcus felt relief wash over him. "I need to see her." "After you give your statement," Jack said. "Protocol! Protocol can wait," Marcus said firmly. "That woman has been treated as less than human. I promised her she was a person, not a number. I need to make sure she knows that promise was real." Jack studied his former partner, then nodded. "Go. I'll handle the paperwork." Marcus found Sarah at the county hospital in a private room that was bright and clean, the opposite of the cage she'd been trapped in. She was exhausted but alive, and in her arms was a tiny baby girl, pink and perfect and crying lustily. "Marcus," Sarah said when she saw him, her voice thick with emotion. "You came." "I promised I would," Marcus said, approaching slowly so as not to startle her. "How are you?" "Free," Sarah said, and the word seemed to hold all the weight in the world. "For the first time in 2 years, I'm free. They took me, kept me locked up, treated me like an animal. They told me I was nothing, that I was just a number, that no one would ever care what happened to me." Tears streamed down her face. "But you did. You cared enough to risk your life. You gave me back my name." "You never lost it," Marcus said gently. "They tried to take it, but Sarah, that's who you've always been. They couldn't change that no matter what they did." Sarah looked down at her baby. "I want to name her Hope, because you gave me that. Hope that there are still good people in the world. Hope that my daughter will grow up free." "Hope is a beautiful name," Marcus said. Over the following weeks, Marcus ensured that Sarah and all the other rescued women received medical care, counseling, and legal support. He connected them with organizations that helped trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. He testified at the trials that saw Strand and his associates sentenced to lengthy prison terms. But Sarah's case was personal to him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Perhaps because she'd been so close to giving birth when he found her. Perhaps because of the quiet strength she'd shown in the face of unimaginable cruelty. Perhaps simply because she reminded him why he'd become a marshal in the first place, to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. 6 months after the rescue, Sarah had her own apartment, a job, and was building a life for herself and Hope. Marcus visited regularly, ostensibly to check on her progress, but really because he found himself drawn to her resilience and strength. "You saved my life," Sarah told him one evening, as they sat in her small but tidy living room. "Hope sleeping peacefully in a crib nearby." "You saved your own life," Marcus corrected. "You survived. You kept going even when they tried to break you. All I did was open a door." "You did more than that," Sarah said. "You saw me, really saw me, not as number 7, not as a victim, not as entertainment. You saw me as Sarah, as a person worthy of dignity and respect." She took his hand. "You gave me something I can never repay, my identity, my humanity, my future." "You don't need to repay anything," Marcus said. "Seeing you here, safe, building a life, that's all the payment I need." Sarah looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "I know it's complicated. I know I'm damaged, that I have trauma to work through. But somewhere along the way, you became important to me. Not as my rescuer, but as the person who reminded me I could be strong, could rebuild, could hope again." Marcus felt his throat tighten with emotion. "You've become important to me, too." They took it slow, building a relationship on foundation of friendship and mutual respect. Sarah continued her therapy, worked through her trauma, and gradually healed. Marcus supported her without trying to fix her, understanding that healing was something she had to do herself. A year after the rescue, they were married in a small ceremony with the other women Marcus had rescued as witnesses. It wasn't a fairy tale ending because real life isn't a fairy tale. Sarah still had nightmares. Marcus still carried guilt about all the people he couldn't save. But they had each other. And they had hope. And they had a shared belief that every person deserves dignity, identity, and freedom. Marcus continued his work, now officially reinstated as a federal marshal specializing in human trafficking cases. Sarah became an advocate for survivors, speaking about her experiences and working to change laws and systems that failed to protect vulnerable people. And together, they made sure that no one would ever again be reduced to a number, treated as less than human, or have their identity stolen by those who saw people as property. Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, they told her the story of how her parents met. Not the sanitized version, but the truth, that her mother had been strong enough to survive unimaginable cruelty, and her father had been brave enough to stand against it. "Your mother was never number 7, Marcus would say. She was always Sarah, even when people tried to take that away. The number was just something cruel people used because they couldn't handle the truth of her humanity." And Sarah would add, "Your father gave me something precious, not just freedom, but the reminder that I was always worth saving, that I always had value even when I couldn't see it myself." Their story became known in advocacy circles, a powerful example of how one person's courage could change lives, how dignity could be restored, how survivors could not only rebuild but thrive. And every year on the anniversary of the rescue, Marcus and Sarah would light a candle for all the people still trapped, still fighting, still hoping for someone to see them not as numbers but as the precious, unique individuals they were. If this story reminded you that every person deserves dignity, identity, and freedom, please share it with someone who needs this message. Subscribe for more stories about standing up for justice, seeing people's inherent worth, and having the courage to fight systems that dehumanize others. Leave a comment about organizations working to end human trafficking or share how you're working to make the world more just. Together, we believe in human dignity, in fighting exploitation, and in the truth that every person matters.